The title for today is Loving Awareness, and that's a name. It's a name that I've borrowed. It's been floating around kind of in books and so on, but seems to have withered away. And what it is, it's a combination of a number of things. And what those things are meditation and mindfulness, acceptance, appreciation, gratitude, compassion, self-compassion, forgiveness, and self-forgiveness. These are all things that make people in the modern world their toes curl, because if you mention any of those things, all they think is that this is airy-fairy, hippy-dippy, pink fluffy clouds, mumbo-jumbo, but they're all very real human experiences. They just get suppressed. So the way our culture deals with most emotion, although there are some emotions that are acceptable, so it's okay to be angry, for example, but it's not okay to be sad. But generally speaking, our culture, what it does is it encourages you to suppress your emotions, and it glorifies that emotional suppression as being stoic and being strong. But what psychology tells us is that there's always a thing called emotional leakage, and this explains why it's okay to be angry. So I've actually spoken to people who have defended their anger. It's okay to be angry because if you're not angry, you won't do something. You won't respond to something or whatever it happens to be. And the way that anger comes about is if you suppress everything else. Let's say you lose someone and you're supposed to grieve, you're supposed to cry, and you don't do that and you bottle it up. It comes out as a thing called emotional leakage. And what emotional leakage, more often than not, appears as anger. Because what you're doing is expressing the frustration internally because you haven't managed to process this loss. And so subsequently, that's the way of the world. And that's not just British culture. There's a lot of cultures in the world like that, where all of the emotions such as sadness get suppressed. But then you go to other parts of Europe. I've mentioned this a few times. There's the olive oil and butter line. So if you're above the butter line where people eat butter, you're somewhere where they suppress their emotions. And if you go down to the olive oil countries, they express their emotions. I was talking to somebody about it the other day, and we were talking about train journeys. Years ago, they went to Italy, so they were working in Italy for quite a while and sort of fell into Italian ways. And then they came back to London, and the first day going back into work in London, just as a quick aside, you hear a lot of people whining about how everybody spends all their time on their mobile phones. If you go back to commuting sort of 30 or 40 years ago, you would walk into a railway carriage and there would just be a wall of newspapers where people are literally hiding behind the newspapers. So she'd got used to communicating with other human beings being in Italy. And so she sat down, and she's probably the only one without a newspaper. And then the train was delayed. And so she said to the person next to her, broke the taboo of speaking to someone that she hadn't been introduced to, and said, does this train always get delayed here? She said, and the newspaper rustled. It was almost as if they were shaking. And there was a sort of a non-committal grunt came out from behind the newspaper, and that was it. And she said, I'm back. There's a perfect example, because what I suggested was, if you get on a railway carriage in England, unless there's some great adversity like a delay or some melodrama, nobody speaks to anybody else. But let's say you did a 3-hour train journey in Italy. By the time you get to the end, you know the family history of everybody that's around you. That's the difference in connection. So this disconnection is something that was one of the first things that I noticed when I started teaching meditation back in 2013, just up the road in Bromley. the things that people would say to me, there was a pattern, and the pattern is social fragmentation. It's the way that communities and families are being separated, and individuals are separated. That's not healthy because we're a social animal and we're evolved to live in tightly connected communities. And so instead, what we're in is a big socially fragmenting community where everybody's set against everybody else: good, bad, right, wrong, fair, unfair, true, false, heroes and villains, truth and lies, and so on and so forth. What happens is we then label other people. We label them as something other than us, and we become separate from them. That process is known as othering. And you know you've othered somebody if you no longer care about whether they're suffering or not. So whenever you hear yourself in your mind saying, oh, somebody deserves something, that you've othered yourself from them. And of course, you can go through your entire life othering more and more groups and more individuals. And then what happens is your world shrinks. And it shrinks into the group that you care for. And very often that's your nuclear family. And I have seen so many of those disintegrate that you're in a very difficult position if you choose to. And it's a choice. At some point, I'm sure everybody comes aware of this. So success is running away from other people. What do people do when they retire? They go to live somewhere away from all of the people that they've known their entire life and the community they've lived in for their entire life. Yeah, what that means is that it has no hold over them. And the rough edges of dealing with other people, of interacting with all of these different worlds, everyone's got a different world in their head. No two people believe the same thing, see the world in the same way, etc., etc. And they've got no tools to deal with the complexity of modern life, and they're not processing how they feel, so they're not able to go back and take another battering in the social connection sphere, and so their world shrinks. If you don't live on the edge of your comfort zone, it shrinks, and then you essentially become a bit of a hermit and go somewhere, and you might try to surround yourself by your family in the hope that that's not going to disintegrate, and then that's it. That's the end of you. So what's instead of the other way round, where you're connecting to more people in more places, doing more things, having more experiences, instead what you're doing is it's shrinking. I hear a lot of people say, you know, I can't wait till I retire, I want to go traveling. All you're doing is you're taking the little social unit around and being in places where it's okay for you to be separate to everybody else. I mean, you rock up in, pick a place, I'm just looking at Ancona. Okay, so it is in eastern Italy. I don't believe it's much of a tourist destination for Brits. Maybe I'm wrong, who knows. So you go there, everybody else speaks Italian except for you. You're sitting at a cafe, watching the world go by. It's just you, yeah? You feel better, you feel less stressed. Couple of reasons for that. One is because of mindfulness, because your brain has switched you on, you become more aware of everything because it's a different environment. And the other is there's no negative associations, so there's nothing to draw you back into the usual narrative in your head. And so what you're doing is when you go on holiday, you're having a little bit of a holiday from yourself and a holiday from your community. I understand the holiday from the workplace, right? I get that one. So what we need to do is two things. One thing is we need to work internally and work with all of the suffering that we accumulate over our life if we don't process it. It's as simple as this. If you have an adverse experience, you either process it or you carry it around as baggage. And then that baggage grows and grows and grows, and then one day you can't hide it any longer. It'll overflow for everybody. And that's what's known as burnout. And that happens to a lot of people. We look around us. There are burnt out people everywhere. We've got to do that internal work, and that's actually quite simple. We're not wallowing in our suffering or confronting our fears or any such thing. It's all done comfortably and easily. And then that enables us to then reconnect over and over again. Because the danger of connecting to people, especially if they're not culturally or they believe they're not intellectually similar to us, is that we might feel rejected. That's where the constricting reality comes from. It's because it's easier not to deal with that person because they make me feel bad in some way. They make me feel inadequate, or they clearly have a perspective of me that doesn't align with how I want to be seen. And so you drop them out of your connection group, and so it shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. And the whole of this is that it needs to grow. And that's why all of these things, mindfulness and, let's say, gratitude, seeing the world in a different way, so you're grateful for it rather than it's just some means to an end. Just take those two things, they converge. So let's just say mindfulness is awareness, and so I'm now aware of the light shining on the surface of the water in the spring water bottle. That's all very well and good, but it's just spring water, right? If I spend a little time looking at it, I realise that I can appreciate the way that the waves and ripples move on it and the colours change. What's happened there is mindfulness, the awareness of the experience of the present moment, and the appreciation of the experience of the present moment have converged. And the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that whole, that's what I call loving awareness. And so the way to get there is through meditation, and that's what we're going to do now. What we'll do is a little experiment before we do any meditation. And what that experiment consists of is, if you close your eyes, it's a listening experiment. Normally when we listen to something, we're trying to get some sort of message from it, or working out something in our heads. But what we're going to do now instead is just to notice the sound of the bell, but I want you to notice it as it moves through time. Stay with it. When I ask people what's in the sound of the bell, they tell me it's things like harmony and vibration and peace and calm and continuous sound and relaxation. But only if you stay with the sound of the bell as it moves through time. And then the question comes, what's not in the sound of the bell? And what's not in the sound of the bell is difficult people and careers and difficult neighbours and finances and modern life problems. We can't carry a bell with us all the time to have this experience of stepping out of the suffering of modern life, but what we've got instead is something else. So again, it's useful to keep our eyes closed, but if we don't, we can look down past the tip of our nose with our eyes half shut, just so we don't get distracted by anything that's going on around us. And we get the same experience if we focus our attention on the belly moving, just at the point where the belly meets the chest. And what we do is we stay focused on that movement. Just a tiny little movement, and we're able to observe it rising and falling. And see, it doesn't matter what the mind does. The mind will do whatever the mind will do. Your attention will do whatever your attention does. Your attention might go to something internally, should have done this, should have done that, this is good, this is bad, etc., etc. Future, the past, whatever. And all you do is you bring your attention back to the present moment, and you do that by noticing this tiny little movement, the rising and falling of the belly. We'll just try that for a minute or two. And there's also something else that we're able to focus our attention on that's always there, that's continuously moving through time, and that's the ambient sound. The ambient sound is the background sound that's always there, whether we're in a city or whether we're in nature. Notice the way in the modern world we separate those two things out. Let's say the countryside. So they all have sounds, but those sounds are continuous. Countryside, the sound of the wind, sound of the trees, sound of the birds, dogs barking. There'll be traffic, there'll be airplanes. In the city, traffic, people's voices, dogs barking again, they're everywhere, the dogs, airplanes, movements in the room, the sound of your breath, constant sound. So you can notice these two things happening at the same time. The movement of the belly rising and falling, and sound moving through time. And your job is just to notice that, and notice whether they're both moving through time at the same speed. Is the breath rising and falling, moving through time at the same speed as the ambient sound is moving through time? And we can investigate this movement of the breath through time in a different way as well. So we can notice the breath in the belly, noticing the belly rising and noticing the belly falling. But if we breathe in a particular way, then we notice something else. So the particular way is by placing your tongue up against the back of the top teeth so that it's ever so gently in contact with the sharp part of the bottom teeth. And so then what you're noticing is the breath in the nostrils. Again, we're observing the breath moving through time. We're generally noticing the breath in the nostrils just at the point where the air enters and leaves the nostrils. So we've got these two places that we're aware of the breath. We're aware of the breath rising and falling, the belly. And we're aware of the breath entering and leaving the nostrils. And as we begin to breathe in, the air in the nostrils is cool as we breathe in. And as we breathe out, the air becomes warm. Coolness, warmth. Not everybody notices that. You might just notice the sensation. Inhale, exhale. And again, that's all moving through time. But we want to know something else as well. And there's no point thinking about this. It's like a hand skill. It's something to do with sensory experience that tells us whether it's right or not. There's a point at which we begin to breathe in from the nostrils. And it just begins to become cool. And there's a point at which we begin to breathe out from the nostrils and they begin to become warm. Cool in breath, warm out breath. And in the breath in the belly, there's a point at which the belly begins to rise. And there's the point where the belly begins to fall. And what we want to notice, whether at the beginning of the in-breath, whether the coolness begins at exactly the same moment as the belly begins to rise, and that the warmth in the nostrils begins at exactly the same moment that the belly begins to fall. So does the cool breath begin just at the same moment as the belly begins to rise? And does the warmth in the nostrils begin at just exactly the same moment as the belly begins to fall? And as you observe these movements and these sensations, that's what you're trying to do. You just want to notice whether the in-breath in the nostrils begins at the same point as the belly begins to rise, and the out-breath of the nostrils begins at exactly the same point the belly very first begins to fall. So you spend a few minutes noticing whether that's happening or not. A little practice I call the synchronization of the breath. Now we want to check in with our physiology, and we want to intervene in our stress. And so step one is to adopt an open, balanced and relaxed posture. So we can begin by placing our elbows by our sides and noticing the shoulders. So if the elbows are in front of us, we're leaning forward. And what we do is we move the elbows back and we notice the shoulders. And you're able to notice the shoulders rising and falling. What we do is we extend the out breath a little bit, and the best way to do that is just by making it ever so slightly internally audible. So that's a little sound internally, nobody else can hear it except for you. And all you do is you make that sound as you breathe out. And what you're doing there is extending the breath. So this is thousands of years old. It's a thing called pranayama. Prana means breath, ayama means extend. And as you do that, as you extend your out breath, you bring your attention to your shoulders. And we want the shoulders to become as comfortable as possible. So there we are, we're breathing out through the nostrils, we're extending the out breath ever so slightly. We've got our elbows by our sides, we've focused our attention on our shoulders, and then what we do is we find the most comfortable position for our head to be balanced on our shoulders. This is a bit of a trial and error process, so you just move your head around until you find it's the most comfortable place. As we're extending the out breath, we're focusing our attention on our shoulders, and we're noticing that the shoulders rise when we breathe in and that they fall when we breathe out. another little synchronization exercise. There's the point where we just begin to breathe in, and there's the point where we just begin to breathe out. And again, it's a noticing exercise. Notice whether the shoulders begin to rise just at the point where the air begins to enter the nostrils, and do they begin to fall just at the point where the air begins to leave the nostrils? So now if thoughts arise and your mind wanders, that's fine. But when you notice that your mind's wandered, you need to acknowledge it, because the mind's a little bit like a toddler. All it wants is it wants your attention. There you are, you're meditating, you're focusing on the important issue of whether the air in the nostrils is entering and leaving at exactly the same point as the shoulders are rising and falling, and you find yourself mind wandering, and there you are in some future or past scenario acting out a mental movie, and you notice that. So when you notice it, you need to acknowledge it, and the way you do that is by saying in your mind, thinking, thinking. And you go back to the synchronization of the breath and the shoulders. Noticing whether the in-breath begins at the point that the shoulders begin to rise, and whether the out-breath begins at the point where the shoulders begin to fall. And if you find yourself drifting into a mental movie, the mind wanders, whatever it happens to be, when you notice, you just gently, compassionately say in your mind, thinking, thinking, and you bring your focus back to the breath and the shoulders. So it's breath and shoulders, mind wanders, thinking, thinking, back to the breath and shoulders. Repeat, practice this for the next few minutes. This is another synchronization of the breath meditation. process of saying thinking, thinking in your mind. That's known as labeling. What we're doing is labeling thoughts. And you can use that for any thoughts, doesn't matter what they are. Whatever thoughts arise in your mind, whatever thoughts take your attention away from your focus, whatever that might happen to be, whenever it might happen to be, you just state it in your mind, thinking, thinking, and then back to the breath. Noticing the breath rising and falling, noticing whether it's in sync or not. Your tongue against the back of the top teeth in contact with the sharp part of the bottom teeth. Your elbows by the side. Extending the out breath ever so slightly. And now we can have another point of focus. Notice what we've been doing throughout this is we've been noticing the present moment moving through time. You can notice it as I'm speaking. Notice sound and my words moving through time. And so if you have a busy mind, you use your inner dialogue. Your busy mind is your inner dialogue. It's rattling away in the background, telling you stuff. But you use it, and you use it in what's known as a mantra. And all a mantra is something that you say in your mind. It can be anything. But here's a mantra that I teach. And what we do is, as we meditate, we're sitting comfortably, we're relaxed, we're focused, we're aware of the passage of time, present moment moving through time, and we say in our minds, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be free from suffering, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be free from suffering. May I be well. May I be happy, noticing the words moving through time. May I be free from suffering. We'll just practice that for a few minutes. We're using it in this instance to observe the words arising in our mind one after the other, like pebbles falling into a pool. May I be well. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. There you are, you're listening to it. Same way you're listening to sound, the breath. You're listening to words. May I be well. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. Now allowing your mind to be free, noticing the experience of the present moment moving through time. Sound, the breath, my words, the sound of the bell moving through time. And then whenever you're ready in your very, very, very own time, gently return your attention to your surroundings.